Before we get into this, stay with me until the end, because the last one on this list is the investment most people are making right now without even realizing it, and it's quietly the most expensive of them all. Picture a version of you about 15 years from now, sitting down to check a retirement account that somehow never grew the way you thought it would, even though you were sure you were doing the responsible thing the entire time. You made payments on time, you avoided obvious scams, you never gambled your savings away in some reckless bet, and yet the number on the screen feels smaller than it should, thinner than the years of effort behind it. That moment is not caused by a single bad decision. It is the slow accumulation of choices that felt safe, felt normal, felt like what everyone else was doing. And that is exactly what makes them dangerous, because the worst investments are rarely the ones that look reckless from the outside. The core idea here is simple, once you see it clearly. The investments that quietly damage an average American's financial life are not the flashy, obviously risky ones people warn you about. They are the culturally normalized ones, the ones baked into how an entire society is taught to spend, borrow, and measure success, so they never get questioned in the moment they are made. A depreciating asset bought with debt, a subscription model dressed up as convenience, a status purchase disguised as a milestone, these all share one trait, which is that they transfer wealth away from the person making the purchase and toward the institution selling it, while feeling like personal progress the whole time. To understand why this happens, it helps to look at the psychology underneath it rather than the financial mechanics first. Humans are wired to respond to immediate, visible rewards far more strongly than to slow, invisible outcomes. And the financial industry, along with the broader consumer economy, has built an entire structure around that wiring. A new car provides an instant hit of identity and status the moment you drive it off the lot, while the interest payments and depreciation curve unfold silently over years, invisible unless you go looking for them. A home renovation feels like an investment in comfort and eventual resale value, but the emotional payoff arrives immediately while the actual return on that spending, if it exists at all, arrives much later and is usually smaller than expected. This mismatch between when the reward is felt and when the cost is felt is the single biggest reason ordinary, cautious people end up making financially poor decisions without ever feeling reckless while doing it. Now let's look at the actual math, because the numbers make the pattern impossible to ignore. Take the classic example of financing a new vehicle instead of buying a reliable used one. A new car loses roughly 20% of its value in the first year alone, and around 60% by the 5-year mark, which means someone financing a $40,000 vehicle at a typical interest rate is often paying close to $48,000 over the life of the loan for an asset that is worth perhaps $16,000 by the time it's paid off. That gap of over $30,000, if invested instead in a broad market index fund, averaging a historical return near 7% annually, would grow to roughly $115,000 over 20 years. The car did not just cost $48,000, it cost the version of you that could have had an extra $100,000 later. And that opportunity cost never shows up on a receipt, which is precisely why nobody feels it happening. The same math applies, often more severely, to consumer debt used for lifestyle purchases rather than appreciating assets. Credit card balances carried month to month at typical interest rates of around 20 to 25% mean that a $2,000 purchase, if only minimum payments are made, can end up costing $4,000 or $5,000 once fully repaid, stretched out across years of quiet, compounding interest working against the borrower instead of for them. Compound growth is often described as the eighth wonder of the world, but it works with the same intensity in reverse, and an average household carrying revolving debt is experiencing negative compounding at the exact same mathematical rate that a disciplined investor is experiencing positive compounding, just aimed at building someone else's wealth instead of their own. Zooming out from any single purchase, the pattern becomes systemic rather than personal. An entire economy is structured to encourage consumption over accumulation, because continuous spending is what keeps GDP growing, keeps retailers profitable, and keeps lenders earning interest. marketing, financing options, planned obsolescence in product design, and cultural milestones tied to spending, like the idea that a wedding must cost a certain amount or a home must be a certain size, all point the average person toward transactions that generate revenue for someone else first and value for the buyer second, if at all. This is not framed as a conspiracy, because it does not need to be one to function. It simply requires that enough people never stop to calculate the actual long term cost of a decision that felt normal in the moment, and the system sustains itself through that lack of friction, rather than through any single deliberate deception. What makes this genuinely difficult to escape is that avoiding these worst investments requires a kind of identity shift rather than just better arithmetic. It means becoming a person who is comfortable driving a car that is a few years old, while colleagues drive something newer, comfortable renting a smaller apartment while others stretch into a bigger mortgage, comfortable being seen as slightly behind by conventional markers of success, while quietly being ahead in the metric that actually compounds, which is net worth over time. That shift is uncomfortable because it runs against social signaling that most people never consciously examine, and it requires tolerating short term perception costs in exchange for long term financial ones, a trade that very few people are trained to make because almost nothing in the culture rewards patience the way it rewards visible status. The people who do end up financially secure later in life are rarely the ones who made one brilliant investment. They are usually the ones who simply avoided the handful of financially corrosive habits that everyone else considered normal and let ordinary, unremarkable saving and investing do the quiet work over a long enough period of time. There is nothing dramatic about that path, no single moment of triumph to point to, just a steady accumulation built on the absence of a few specific, avoidable leaks. So, the real question worth sitting with is not which stock to buy or which side hustle to start this year. It is which of these normal, socially accepted spending patterns you have been treating as harmless, when in reality, they have been the single largest drag on your financial future the entire time, operating exactly as they were designed to. If this reframed even one purchase you've been treating as normal, it's worth sitting with a little longer. So take a moment to think about which one applies to you, and if you want more of this kind of thinking laid out clearly, stick around for what comes next.